Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, bringing timely economic discussion to the region for nearly 40 years. Thank you to our sponsors and partners. Presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. Cooperating sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Pretty Flaherty. Community Corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Tomorrow's leaders and entrepreneurs sponsors, AAA Northern New England and ProSearch. Coffee sponsor, Skowhegan Savings. Parking sponsor, Vitalius Real Estate Group. Media partners, radio sponsor, WGAN. Print sponsor, The Forecaster. TV sponsor, WMTW Maine CW. Business news sponsor, Maine Biz. With production support provided by Headlight. Venue partner, Holiday Inn by the Bay. And thank you to our special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Memic, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, Southern Maine Community College, and the University of Southern Maine. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Britt Vitalius.
Good morning, and welcome to the November 17th, 2022 Eggs and Issues, the monthly business breakfast series brought to you by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. My name is Britt Vitalius. I'm the owner of Vitalius Real Estate Group, a real estate brokerage here in Portland, and I'm honored to serve as the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you all for being here this month, our third installment of our 37th season of Eggs and Issues. After 2.5 years of modified virtual hybrid events, we are so happy to be back here in person at Holiday Inn by the Bay, all together. This morning, we are joined by a group of industry experts to discuss the current state of the Maine lobster industry amidst increasingly strict federal regulations and red listing from multiple environmental groups. Before I invite our panelists to the stage, I want to take a moment again to recognize each of our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who make this event possible. First and foremost, our presenting sponsors, Bank of America, Martins Point Healthcare, and Central Maine Power. I also want to thank our other generous sponsors, our cooperating sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, our reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Pretty Flaherty, our community corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Today's Community Corner is the Summit Project. The Summit Project is a living memorial dedicated to honoring fallen service members from Maine who have died in the line of duty since September 11, 2001. Their tribute hikes bring the entire community together to ensure that Maine heroes are not forgotten. By carrying their memorial stones on tribute hikes, carrying their stories for a lifetime, as seen in these clips from a Baxter State Park hike in 2014. The Summit Project will be celebrating its 10th year anniversary in 2023. And to celebrate 10 years of honoring Maine's fallen heroes, a team of 10 individuals will be hiking 10 miles each day for 10 days on the hardest 100 miles of the Appalachian Trail during the Heroes 100 event, starting July 1st, 2023. Sponsorships opportunities are available. Please see Greg Johnson here up in front, and he had a table out there. I think we've got some programs on your desk if you're interested. To learn more about the Summit Project and see the participants' journey, visit their website at thesummitproject.org. They're also in their third week of an online auction series, so please feel free to stop by and take a peek while you're there. Tomorrow's leaders and entrepreneurs sponsors, AAA Northern New England and ProSearch. Through this program, the Chamber is able to offer students in the region, both high school and college, an invitation to attend Eggs and Issues at no cost. I believe we have students from USM and SMC here today, and if so, please stand and be recognized. Students, any? No? Yeah. Thank you for being here. Please go up and say hi. If you're a member of the business community, go up and say hi and welcome them after the event. Our coffee sponsor, Skowhegan Savings, brewing great coffee since 1869. I had to look that up last night. Parking sponsor, Vitalis Real Estate Group. We're more than a real estate brokerage, we also park your car. A special thanks to media partners, The Forecaster, WGAN, WMTW, Maine CW, and Maine Biz. Our FMI, or For More Information sponsor, is the Portland Public Library, and production support is provided by Headlight Audio Visual. Our venue host today, obviously, is Holiday Inn by the Bay. Finally, a super chamber thank you to our special community partners who support all our chamber initiatives. Anthem, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, University of Southern Maine Community College, and MEMIC. Now, please join me in another round of applause for all of our generous sponsors. Before I introduce today's panel, I want to acknowledge a huge victory we had at the polls last week. There were 13 questions on Portland's municipal ballot. We really cared about 7 of the questions, and we defeated 6 of the 7 questions on the ballot. They were really important, and we defeated them decisively with commanding margins. The Enough is Enough campaign was strongly supported by the Chamber, and we thank all of our members and the voters of Portland for recognizing these challenges from governing by referendum and voting accordingly. This has been a wave that has been coming at our city, really trying to take our city hostage, this referendum process, and this election really put sort of the brakes on that and said, no, this is not okay, and I want everyone to keep paying attention because the next step is reforming the referendum process. It's the process, the vulnerabilities in the way the referendums are able to get put forward in Portland that makes us vulnerable to this. And we're gonna just keep doing it year after year. We're voting on the same issue year after year. These are not even new issues. So please stay engaged. I also want to take a moment to give a special thanks to Quincy Hensel and Eamon Dundon from the Chamber. These folks carried a huge lift for the Chamber, and we owe them a big debt of gratitude, and they really show how valuable the Chamber is to our business community, and that the advocacy that we do here is so important to the vitality and stability of our community that we all love. So thanks, Quincy and Eamon. I would like all Eggs and Issues attendees, that's all you're here, to keep an eye on your inboxes, as the Chamber will be sending out a survey over the next couple weeks containing questions about the entire Eggs event and process, from registration check-in, speaker preferences, food options, and more. We want to ensure that all of our events are best serving our members' needs, so please share some feedback with us. And now on to today's presentation, Maine without lobsters. Like many of you, I kind of know a lot about lobsters. I know how to shuck them. I know they're good with butter, that soft shells are easier to open than hard shells. They don't cut your hands as much, and I can even make a pretty good lobster sandwich the day after. But watching the headlines recently, I realized that I don't actually know much about the lobster industry, and I certainly don't know much about right whales. But I know something's going on, and it's big, and it's really important. So fortunately today, we are joined by 3 industry experts who will dive into the science, the economics, and the impact that the current and impending regulations will have on the lobstering industry in Maine. Please welcome to our stage Patrice McCarron and Marianne LaCroix. And by Zoom, we are going to be joined by Kurt Brown. He came down with a little touch of COVID the other day, so he thought he would do this event from home, but is well enough to join us, and I think sounds like it's very important that he does and is very well spoken on this topic, so we're excited to have Kurt. Now, if I didn't mess these guys up too much by getting them distracted with this screen, we're going to start with a video about the lobstering industry.
It's more than just a job for Maine lobstermen. It's definitely a set of values and principles that they adhere to, whether it's protecting the Gulf of Maine, being a part of a family, being a part of a community. It extends way beyond just being on the boat catching lobsters.
The Maine lobster fishing community truly cares about the environment and making sure that it stays a healthy environment, because our livelihoods depend on it, our families depend on it, our communities depend on it, and it's beautiful.
The Maine lobster industry is its own organism. It has a soul. When you get out there and you talk with fishermen and you work with fishermen, you just feel the sense of the heritage and the tradition and what makes them tick.
If you ask any lobsterman up and down the coast of Maine what they're most proud of as a fishery, the first thing they'll tell you is they're proud of the way that our resource is managed. They're proud of the way we protect lobsters. And the second thing they'll tell you is how we protect right whales and how we've been doing it for a long time. These sacrifices that we've made as an industry have worked. We are effectively protecting right whales here in Maine. One of the things that really inspired me as a young lobsterman to become a marine biologist was these collaborative research projects that were going on up and down the coast of Maine with fishermen and scientists. And those are the projects that we learn the most from and the projects that have been the most beneficial to the conservation of our resource here in Maine.
All Maine lobstermen want to preserve what we have. We're true conservationists. We want to see the future generations have what we have now and what the people before us provided for us. And through those different conservation measures, we've been able to sustain one of the most sustainable fisheries in the world.
What my kids have learned, what my husband learned, what other fishing families have learned is that in order to keep going, we have to protect the resource and our environment and be able to adapt and be resilient. And we've learned those lessons and want to continue to learn those lessons and pass them on down the road. The point of pride and keeping that going is incredibly important to fishing families. And it's important to them to leave the ocean and its resources in a better place for the next generation, because everybody feels like their ability to fish has been a gift handed to them from their forefathers.
Thank you. I think my mic's probably live. Thank you to the Maine Lobstering Marketing Collaborative for giving us access to their video and letting us hear directly from the fishermen who will be impacted by these regulations. Let's get into it. Maybe you can briefly introduce yourselves. We just saw you on the video, Patrice.
Yeah, I clearly need to invest in a new wardrobe. It's like I'm wearing the same thing. That aside, my name is Patrice McCarran. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Lobstermen's Association. I've been with MLA since the year 2000. I've worked on this issue directly for 22 years, and I'm just really proud to represent the Maine lobster fishery and to be fighting to save it so that we have something to hand down to the next generation.
Marianne.
I'm Marianne LaCroix. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Lobster Marketing Collaborative. We brought you the video today. And we're an organization, we're a marketing board that's funded by the industry, so there's a license surcharge for lobstermen, dealers, and processors, and that comes to us, and we just work to promote Maine lobster worldwide.
And we're joined by Kurt. Kurt, thank you so much for joining. How are you feeling?
So far, so good this morning. I appreciate the flexibility and letting me join remotely. I know it's been a while since we've had one of these hybrids, so it's much appreciated on my end. My name is Kurt Brown. I grew up in Cape Elizabeth, started lobstering when I was a kid, still lobster to this day. I'm also a marine biologist at Ready Seafood Company, which is based in both Portland and Saco. We ship live and value-added lobster products around the world, and I've spent the last 2 months crisscrossing the country. I think I'm on my 5th trip across the country, basically educating our customers all about this issue. I just got back from a trip to one of our customers, which is why I am sitting here today with COVID presenting to you. It's probably the first Eggs and Issues presentation that's been done in underwear in quite a while. I'm just kidding, I'm not wearing underwear.
You can see, you can see why it's important we made sure Kurt was here, even if he couldn't be here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. There's a room full of people here that you probably can't see, but people are interested in this topic, and we've got a great room for our discussion today. So, well, why don't we start out with just some context? There's a lot of the issue that I'm excited to learn about and a lot of details we're going to get into, but just let's start with some perspective on the lobstering industry in Maine, the coastal communities. Like, what does it really mean to Maine? You know, we're sort of aware of the brand, we eat lobsters, we know that people lobster, but can you give us some perspective and context?
Sure, I can start with that. So we've been, Maine lobster, it's the oldest commercial fishery in the country. People have been doing it as long as they've been here in Maine. Fishermen were working on sustainability back in the 1800s, long before a lot of people were thinking about it. They had laws on the books in the 1870s, and they continued to, and these are laws that actually the fishermen were putting together. So, you know, they really saw how the fishery needed to be run. They wanted to be able to have their children continue to fish. They wanted to make sure lobster was in the ocean. So they put regulations in place that made the fishery what it is today, and that's why we have a thriving fishery today. So this is, you know, it's a very sustainable fishery, and it's really important for our coastal and island communities and for the whole state. We have people, you don't see it so much down here in Maine, but you know, as you get further up the coast, this really is the core of the, you know, of these coastal communities.
Yeah, I'll just add to pick up on that. The lobster industry truly is the economic backbone of our coastal communities. Our fishery is very unique. We are an owner-operator fishery by law, so there is zero corporate ownership of anybody in the lobster fleet. So licenses go to the lobsterman, you are assigned to a boat, and you are given so many traps. So every dollar that the lobster industry earns, which was close to $750 million in 2021, the value of the product sold at the docks, those are what we call lobster dollars, and those are the first dollars spent in the majority of our coastal communities. If you take those dollars away, you take the workforce away. We have 4,800 licensed commercial lobstermen in Maine and another 1,100 students, many of whom put themselves through college by fishing in the lobster industry. With our captains and crew combined, we have about 12,000 jobs right on the water. That's the fishery alone. So if lobstermen aren't fishing, if they aren't spending that money locally, we're going to lose our hardware stores and our restaurants and our coffee shops. The entire coastal economy really is built on that. It's also the future of our industry. We have kids in down East Maine who don't have a lot of job prospects. So this multi-generational fishery that we have, people coming up as students, learning the trade, it really provides a reason for people to stay and work in these rural communities. We also have a very robust supply chain, so all of the people buying lobster, processing lobster, and selling lobster, that part of the fishery alone is worth about $1 billion and directly employs over 5,500 people. So we are well over a $2 billion industry to the state, and primarily operating communities without other job prospects. So cannot be overstated.
Yeah, it's really unique that it can be such a large industry and yet no one big company that's running it. It's still very mom and pop. And,
right. No dollars flowing out of Maine to corporations. Everybody is based here and everybody is based local.
Yeah. And it's sustainable. Can you talk about, you know, they talked about it in the video a little bit. It's different than some other, you know, types of aquaculture where you could overfish. And something about the lobstering where, and I don't know much about it, like you're kind of feeding them, and if they're not of size and they're not shedders or breeders, you throw them back. And that's why this has been sustainable. We don't tend to over lobster our.
Yeah,
I
The
think
fishery.
we should hand that to Kurt.
Oh,
Since he's, we can't see him, but
That's
this
all
is
right.
what he does.
Yeah, no, if you can hear me, that's fine. It's one of the most sustainable fisheries in the entire world, and the conservation measures we have in place in our fishery are very simple and very common sense. The only way you can legally harvest a lobster here in Maine is with a trap. Everything that comes up in a trap gets measured. If a lobster is too small, we throw it back into the ocean alive. If a lobster is too big, if a lobster is over 5 inches carapace length, or about 4.5 pounds, it also goes back into the ocean. We'll take a picture of that giant monster lobster, but then we'll also throw it back. Because those large, big lobsters are our breeders. A 1-pound lobster female can produce about 10,000 eggs a year and release those. And that's a lot, don't get me wrong, but a 4 or a 5-pound female lobster can produce and release over 100,000 eggs, and studies have shown that those eggs are of higher quality and survive at higher rates. So we throw those larger lobsters back. It's tough to do, they're worth a lot of money. I don't want to throw that back, it's worth $100. But that's an investment in your future. That's an insurance policy, and that's why everyone does it. If we catch a female lobster with eggs, she goes back in the ocean too. But before we throw her back, we cut a notch into one of her tail flippers. That signifies she's a proven breeder. So if she's caught again, even if she doesn't have eggs and she has that notch, she's illegal to keep. So like I said, common sense rules have kept our fishery sustainable for generations, like Marianne said. And these rules are not only followed by harvesters, they are also enforced by harvesters. If you're cheating in this fishery, I can guarantee you, you will not last a very long time. And there are subtle and not so subtle ways to let people know that they won't last. I won't go into too many details there, but I think you get a sense of how it works. It works effectively, it's worked effectively for generations, and if we're allowed to keep fishing, it will continue to work.
Again, it seems to be very unique in that it's really self-policing and self-maintaining this whole industry. It's not been through government regulations that the lobster industry has survived. But with that, why don't we pivot and let's get into the issue a little bit. What is going on? Are lobster traps, are lobster lines just grabbing right whales? Are they getting tangled in them every week, every month? Like, what's going on? There's something about traps, there's something about right whales.
I'm happy to jump in real quick with this one, and then I'll let Patrice and Marianne speak a little bit more, but I'll give a little history here too. So one thing we can all agree on in this room, even though I'm not in this room, I think one thing everyone around this issue can agree on is that it's important to protect right whales. They're majestic creatures, they're amazing, and we all need to do our best to protect them. I would argue that there isn't a group in this country that's done more to protect right whales than Maine lobster men and women. I've been lobstering since I was a kid, and I've been protecting right whales since I was in high school. I graduated from Cape Elizabeth High School in 1998. In the spring of my senior year, I spent my last $100 on whale-safe gear so I could go lobstering that summer. Since then, our industry has replaced all floating rope with sinking rope to reduce the risk to right whales. We put weak links designed to break away in the unlikely event of an entanglement in all of our end lines, and this year we put new and different weak links in all of our end lines. We've reduced the number of end lines over the years, and in the process removed over 30,000 miles of rope from the Gulf of Maine. We mark all of our gear with unique purple markings so that in the unlikely event of an entanglement, we know exactly where that entanglement occurred. And most recently, we closed over 967 square miles of prime fishing grounds to lobster fishing to protect right whales. All of this comes at a cost. I've spent over $20,000 out of my own pocket over the last 20 years protecting right whales. You multiply that by 5,000 harvesters up and down the coast of Maine, that's $100 million our industry has spent protecting right whales. I would challenge any environmental group to show the same receipts. I'm an environmentalist. I'm not knocking environmental groups, but we as an industry are a group of environmentalists. If none of this was working, it wouldn't matter. But if there's two numbers I want all of you to remember when you leave today, it is 0 and 0. What we are doing is working. There have been 0 documented entanglements of a right whale in Maine lobster gear since 2004, and there have been 0 documented mortalities of a right whale in Maine lobster gear ever. I'm sure that's shocking to many of you given the headlines you've read over the last week, the last month, the last years, but those are facts. And what we have done as an industry has worked, and it will continue to work. So you guys go ahead and jump in, but thank you.
So let me back up. Thanks, Kurt. Why is this an issue now? Like, are these whales just coming to the area? Did they just become endangered? Like, what has changed recently? Are there a lot of right whales out in the bay out here? Are they just here? Are they endangered species?
Yeah, it is the most counterintuitive story you will ever hear. In fact, right whales are endangered. What's changed is that the population's declining. Everything that Kurt just explained actually led to when we started implementing right whale conservation measures in the late 90s, there were about 250 right whales. In 2017, the federal government told us there were close to 500 whales. That same year, they published a new model. So instead of counting right whales and sort of doing a census on how many there are, they started modeling the right whale population. And in 2017, when that number came out, they said, oh, we thought we were close to 500 whales, but in fact, we have a lot fewer than we thought. The population is in decline, and by the way, it's been in decline since 2010. So a lot of the urgency you hear around this sounds like, well, lobstermen have been doing nothing, but in fact, there was a 7-year delay before we even found out that the right whale population was in decline. So we immediately went into a new regulatory process, and that culminated with a round of regulations in May of 2022 when lobstermen reduced their risk by 60%, and we did that in some of the ways that Kurt said. We removed a lot of rope from the water by putting more traps together on the bottom to take buoy lines out. We took rope out of the water through the closure. The rope that's left is much weaker than it used to be. But ironic to all of this is that at the same time the right whale population started to decline, the ocean shifted. It got a little bit warmer. The little microscopic zooplankton that right whales eat sort of shifted away from the Gulf of Maine, and right whales started going to Canada. And this is well documented that there are far fewer right whales using the waters where Maine lobstermen fish than there were prior to 2010. So you would think, that's good news for us. It's not. In 2017, 12 right whales were confirmed to have died in Canada. 2 years later, another 11 right whales were confirmed to have died in Canada. The last 2 years, 2020 and 2021, 4 right whales were confirmed to have died in the US in southeast waters off Florida and Georgia due to vessel strikes. So why does that affect us? Because the mathematical formula that the federal government uses, if the right whale population is going down, it means that our risk reduction goes up because we have the potential to be interacting with right whales. So I honestly, when I was working on this issue, thought, wow, climate change might really help us. Right whales are leaving our waters, but it's turned out to be the complete opposite. The other thing I'd like to add is that we reduce our risk by 60%. The government changed the model, and we found out after we did that full implementation that we in fact only got 50% credit, not because our fishing effort data changed, but because they just decided to put it into the model in a different way. So a completely arbitrary decision. At the same time, when they said, you know, in order for the Maine lobster fishery to be safe, you have to reduce your risk by 60%, we said, we don't agree, the data don't support that, but we're gonna do it, we're gonna do the right thing. Also during that time, they published another paper that said, you know, when we did the 60% number, we were counting the dead whales that we found, and 60% got you there. But we have another model, and we think that more whales are dying than we see. So for every whale you used to have to save, you have to save 3 more. So our 60% risk reduction is now a 90% risk reduction. And I don't think I need to tell any business owner, if you lose 90% of anything that you have, there's not much left. So we are now saving hypothetically dead whales when the evidence shows that the whales are actually dying due to vessel strikes and in waters outside our country. It is truly mind-bending and an incredible story.
Well, so if it seems like there's a cause and effect problem with their logic too, that we've had this lobster industry for 100 years, and in 2010 they start to see a decline. Was there anything that changed in the way lobstering was done in Maine around that time?
It became safer for whales.
Yeah, our gear became safer, and I want everybody to know that, you know, when the lobster industry talks about these statistics, we're not out like creating our own data to counter the government's data. We are digging into the government data, counting their numbers, and reporting it in a way that they refuse to do. So one of the inquiries we did was to say, okay, you know, before this ocean shifted and after, what was the change in the entanglement rates? And prior to 2010, there were 11 cases of right whales that actually had lobster gear on them. Only 2 of those were from Maine. One was in 2002, one was in 2004. The one in 2004 was actually, the whale was already entangled and it happened to pick up a lobster buoy on the way. After 2010, there is 1 case of a right whale with lobster gear on it, and that gear was from Massachusetts. And in nearly all of these cases, the whales were disentangled and are considered non-serious injuries. So they weren't harmed in any way that was going to prevent them from living a healthy life in the ocean.
Wow. So nothing's really changed. It sounds like a lot of things could be causing the decline in the right whale population in Maine, maybe in the world. Are these global numbers? Are the right whale only here on the East Coast from Florida to Canada?
So we are protecting the North Atlantic right whale. There's also a southern right whale that lives in the south, and then there's a Pacific right whale that's on the west coast that is actually more endangered than our whale, if that's actually possible. So it's a transboundary species. We manage the species with Canada, except the U.S. has had measures in place since 1997, and Canada really only started to put right whale protections in place in 2017 when they had the massive die-off in their waters. So we've been protecting them for a long time. When the ocean shifted in 2010, the right whales left the waters where we had a lot of protections in place. They encountered Canadian vessels, Canadian fishing gear that just wasn't rigged in a way that a right whale could encounter it and get away unharmed. And so that has really been the driver in the decline of the right whale.
Is there anything in their regulatory models that accounts for the fact that there might be other causes other than lobstering? I mean, it sounds like you guys are shouldering the blame, and it's not clear that that's the only factor. It sounds like there's boats, there's climate change, there may be things we're not aware of.
Yeah, so it's widely acknowledged that climate change is driving this. That's why the right whale food's not here. That's why the right whales have moved around. That directly led to a decline in the number of right whale babies that were being born because they weren't finding food. They had to swim around and find it up in Canada. But the models themselves and the federal law itself is designed to stop human interactions, so human-caused death. And another irony, according to the federal government, there is no natural mortality of right whales, so if we weren't killing them, they would apparently be immortal. So the government can acknowledge that climate change is an issue, and Canada's an issue, and federal and vessel strikes are an issue, but for the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the commercial fishery itself is what is managed, so they sort of park all of those issues and say, we know those are happening, but our job here is to manage interactions with fisheries. So it's not a very comprehensive, unified management approach. You're managed in silos. And they assume that for every whale that dies, or we can't figure out why it died, or it's one of the mystery whales that we're saving now, 70% of those are assigned to the fishing industry to save, and only 30% are assigned to the shipping industry to save. So there are a lot of very arbitrary, kind of squishy assumptions in there that make a very big difference on the livelihoods of our fishermen.
The federal government is required to protect these whales, and I think that's important, and that's something that we all understand. And like Patrice said, they are not required to use a worst-case scenario in every parameter of their model, which in their models are super complicated, all models are, but a worst-case scenario is not required in each parameter. And Patrice described a few of those
examples, but other examples include the fact that they used in their model the years 2010 to 2018 to estimate birthing rates for right whales, the worst birthing rate years on record. If they were to have included 2009, which was the highest birthing rate for right whales on record, or 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. They also allocate 50% of the risk from fisheries to right whales to the United States and 50% to Canada, which the data does not support. Like Patrice said, they assume that there is no natural mortality, so the immortal right whale would live forever if it wasn't for us humans. And then the cryptic mortality issue of every documented right whale, for every one that's found, there are 3 that are assumed to be dead. And then of those cryptic mortalities, like Patrice said, 70% go to fishing and 30% go to ship strikes, despite the fact that the data does not support this. And not to mention that we have a model that NOAA themselves can't even update. I'm going to quote from the recent take reduction team quickly here. Take reduction team, Patrice can explain more about that. But this was from about a month ago when Robert Glenn, the lead lobster biologist with the Massachusetts Department of Marine Resources, asked why the figure for average whale mortality is based on the years 2015 to 2019 rather than more current data. The response from NOAA was, quote, "We are limited by our model. We are always a little bit behind in the data that we have. The most recent year we have is actually 2019, unfortunately. So we have to use that until we get updated data." That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable to my 7-year-old son and my 5-year-old daughter who might want to go lobstering when they grow up. It's unacceptable to coastal communities up and down the coast of Maine. It's unacceptable to our state's tax base, and it's unacceptable to our country's most iconic and sustainable fishery. It really, truly is a travesty.
Is there anything in the calculations about cost for one whale versus number of jobs versus livelihoods versus the economy, or does the agency that's promulgating these rules, is that a consideration at all? Whales versus humans?
So they're required under law when they do a NEPA analysis to do an environmental impact study. So they will try to document the economic impact, but it's irrelevant to the conservation plan. So if you had 2 scenarios where one cost twice as much than the other and they both achieve the same conservation goal, you could choose the lesser of the 2 evils. But we have very few options for how we can protect right whales. So we found their numbers to be incredibly low. I think they estimated the cost of the offshore closure to be a couple of $1 million, and we interviewed our fishermen and they were off by tenfold. So they don't always have the data that they need, and we find that it is almost irrelevant. I'll give you an example of one that really frustrated me this week. Under our new rulemaking, we're currently meeting with the federal government through the take reduction team to get a new version of our right whale conservation plan to get us to 90%. And in Maine, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. We're looking at losing probably 3/4 of our lobster traps. We're looking at wide-scale closures, further weakening of our line, hugely impactful. And one of the most disturbing proposals on the table is down East Maine. So, down East Maine, Cutler area, Machias, not much going on there. A full closure of state and federal waters for the months of June, July, and August to save whales. So we looked at the data, like, wow, the New England Aquarium used to have a whale survey there, and they would bring a group of researchers every summer and they would count whales, and they've abandoned their research project because there are no right whales there. So we looked at the model, and there are 0.0006 whales documented in those waters. And they're asking lobstermen to remove their gear for 3 months. So we said, well, why is that? And they said, well, our model says that there could be whales there. The habitat would be suitable for whales, so you're popping as a high risk. So we raised the further question that is a very unique area. We actually have waters that are disputed between the United States and Canada off of Cutler. It's called the gray zone. So Canadian lobstermen and US lobstermen fish side by side. And under this proposal, the US lobstermen would pull their gear out, and we raised the concern with the federal government, well, what are we gonna do about Canada? They still have gear in there, and they would have the potential to bring more in, and their gear's not as safe as ours. They haven't gone through years and years of whale-safe gear measures, and the answer was, their gear is not in our model, so it doesn't make a difference. And I thought, you know, we really do care about right whales. We are really trying hard to save right whales, and that was one of the more disturbing answers that I've gotten, and I thought we've been reduced to a mathematical exercise. They are focused on hitting the number and not thinking about, are the measures we're proposing actually helping whales? Are the measures that we're proposing going to unnecessarily wipe out people? I mean, in Cutler and Machias, those kids only have the summer to fish. That is their way to make money. We have a lot of elderly people who fish, so it's really only the cream of the crop in down East Maine who would even have a chance of prosecuting the fishery and earning a living in communities where there's nothing else to do there. And that is, you know, I get upset about these things, but this is what we're up against. So we're coming back and, you know, trying to provide alternate ways of handling risk in that area, because if we don't handle the risk, the federal law requires that our fishery will be shut down. And I will just mention, not as an aside, but as an aside because I've been talking for too long, but our association has sued the federal government because we're so frustrated. We've raised all of these concerns about science over the last 5 or more years. The federal government has ignored us. We've written every letter, participated in every management meeting. We've hired people to help us, and in the end, when a document came out on the eve of 2021, and I read that we were facing a 98% risk reduction, my board of directors got together and we decided that we needed to sue. That if we didn't take legal action, we were truly going to lose our fishery. So really extraordinary measures from us, but this is where we are. This is where the federal government has put us.
Well, it sounds like we're in some sort of Kafka-esque bureaucratic nightmare here.
Yes.
Is there, you know, so often we think of problems with the government as being political problems, and whether it's one side versus the other. It sounds like that's not the situation here. This is not the politicians just playing for something. This is just an agency and rulemaking and models and sort of the really geeky stuff you're talking about that's way deep down in some agency, and it's not clear who changes it. I mean, how do we get out of this?
Yeah, we have a multi-pronged approach. Obviously, we're still participating in the regulatory process. We're still at the management table. We are, you know, putting a gun to our heads to figure out how to get to 90% risk reduction. We have to do that. We've taken it to the courts. We firmly believe that the government has based all of our risk reduction goals on worst case assumptions, as Kurt explained. A judge ruled against us and said under the Endangered Species Act, you put your thumb on the scale of the endangered species, but our reading of the Endangered Species Act is quite different. The Endangered Species Act was amended to have the act address threats that are reasonably certain to occur and wouldn't unnecessarily harm an industry. So we're in a little bit of a you know, who thinks about what on that. That's gone to the appeals court. I think we have a very, very strong case. We're also hiring scientists and doing a deep dive into some of the models because we think that it's just plain wrong. And then we're working with our fishermen to try to be creative and figure out, you know, how on earth do we come up with these measures to fix some of these things and keep our industry viable? How can we redesign the lobster fishing business model in a way that will support this incredibly diverse fleet from 20-foot skiffs up to 50-foot boats and everything in between, so that everybody still has a place to make a living, that people can continue to live and work in our rural communities, and we can save right whales.
Wow. It was just some news today. Can someone interpret what just came out in in the news today what this agency
sure.
just said?
So you might have read or heard that the Marine Stewardship Council has suspended Maine Lobster's certification. This is a sustainability certification that different companies use to ensure that they're buying a sustainable seafood product. So our suppliers use it when they're selling to grocery stores, restaurant chains, things like that. This has been in place since 2016. It's audited, the fisheries audited every year to make sure it's still sustainable. There's a big 5-year audit that was actually completed this year. It was delayed because of COVID, but and the independent auditing organization that looked at the fishery did a in-depth dive and determined that the fishery was not a threat to the right whales, that this fishery was not impeding the recovery of the right whales. So we saw that in June. We said, wow, this is great. We've got the certification. They've really looked at the data and come to this determination. Then the next month, there was a court ruling in the legal case saying that the regulations, Patrice can talk more about this, but basically the regulations that have been put together were flawed. And so the regulations that all the fishermen have been following in good faith were not adequate, and there were legal problems with them. So because of that, the MSC had to do a follow-up audit where they said, well, you can't be out of compliance with the laws, which is very confusing because actually the fishermen are all following all the laws. This was just a case where the laws themselves are flawed. And because of that, that's why they have suspended the certification. So it's actually, they're standing behind the fact that the fishery is sustainable and that, is not a harm to the right whales. So it's, it's very confusing, but does, have the potential to impact our sales.
Wow. We've got a couple mics up now, so if there are questions from the room, you're welcome to step up to a mic and ask a question to our panel. Let's see.
Hi everybody, my name is Sam Chipman. I'm actually a lobsterman myself. I've held my commercial lobster license since I was 18 years old. I've been on the ocean since I was 3. I just wanted to add in a couple pieces that I feel like might be missing in this conversation. For one, there's no denying that there's been a lot of talk about reductions in the industry, cutting the trap tag limit back to at least 400. It's currently at 800 right now. That would be devastating to a lot of Maine families, there's no doubt. But I think that the intentions behind this regulations and all of the shifts that are happening are also stemmed from economic purposes. I mean, certainly NOAA is an agency that's dedicated to protecting the environment, but also something that I think Kurt Brown did not mention is that in that 900 square mile radius that they're closing off, there is a proposal to actually develop offshore windmills there to support green energy. And certainly that's something that's talked about on a lot of different group chats on Facebook between lobstermen, and I'm part of one of those, all things lobstering. I'm sure Kurt Brown is involved in that too. But certainly I think that the economic factors are a big driver in these regulations and the shifts that are going on. And I would also like to just highlight the fact on how these right whales are being recorded. They're being done by flyovers, which are, I don't know how accurate those are, just to say that. But also with the climate change and with lobsters migrating north as well as other chains of life in the ocean, we're seeing the right whales that are diving deeper in the ocean, going up to Canada, like you had mentioned. And there's not really a safe or a really certain way to record those right whales because it is done by flyovers. And I've actually heard that there have been cutbacks in the amount of flyovers that they're doing. NOAA's data is only going up to 2019. So I think that it's inaccurate, and I think that economic drivers with the offshore windmills are part of these regulation factors. I just wanted to highlight those couple of things. Certainly this is something that's very close to home. I'm still lobstering to this day. My boat is in the water. My father did this, and he passed it down to me, and certainly this is something that I'd like to pass down to my kids someday too. So I appreciate everything that you're doing to try to keep the lobster industry going. It's very scary times, but I just wanted to mention those couple of things. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. And I'll just quickly point out, I believe, in Patrice, Marianne, you can confirm this, they do flyovers to monitor right whales. I believe they stopped doing flyovers along the Maine coast because they weren't seeing any for an extended period of time. They just literally stopped looking for them because they weren't there. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, but we complain vehemently about that because you kind of get knocked down pretty hard in the model when there's no confidence around your data because there is not any. So they have dedicated some resources to flying the Gulf of Maine. I monitor those flights very carefully. The U.S. plane happens to be in Canada right now. We only have one plane. Why they continue to send it to Canada, I don't know. They did
That's where the whales are, apparently.
They did spot 12 right whales in Canada yesterday. But for all of the flights here in the Gulf of Maine, there have been 0 right whales sighted in 2022 year to date. The state of Maine has also been very proactive in putting listening devices in the ocean. The waters are divided into state and federal waters, so about 3 miles out, they have an array to catch those in between state and federal waters. There are at least 8 of them out. There have been a handful of detections over the last 2.5 years, maybe 5 total, where they have actually heard a whale. And really of note, the 1,000 square mile closure that we have, the National Marine Fisheries Service closed that. There were maybe 2 detections of whales in those 1,000 square miles of water. Most of the whales that triggered that closure actually happened offshore in a different lobsterman management area, Area 3, where Maine lobstermen don't fish, but they closed it anyway because we have rope. And they put zero resources into monitoring that closure. So 0 planes. The University of Maine happened to coincidentally have an acoustic glider out there. It did detect whales on 2 days. So we had 4 full months of closures, 2 whale detection days, and 0 resources from the federal government dedicating to see whether or not lobstermen's efforts were worthwhile in protecting whales. Nobody's looking for them out there because they are rare.
Brad.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Brad Pierce, and I'm a sustainability consultant. My company's called Seed Strategies, and I have a podcast called Sustainability Mind Shift. And I'm fascinated by this conversation because it's clearly showing to me a battle of paradigms and mindsets that are going on. You know, we have the federal government on the one hand that seems to be operating through the modern mindset that we all have, which is very analytical, fixed on data, hyper-fixated on data, a mechanical mindset that tends to sort of look at things like a machine. And on the other hand, we have you all, which is looking more through that living systems lens because you're connected to the biology of what's going on in the oceans and the whales and the lobsters, and you're also connected to the human systems, the communities that depend on this, the lobstermen. And so when you're having these conversations with them, it's become so clear that you're trying to present this systemic view of things and how you're working with the systems, and you're trying to help the lobsters and the whales and the lobstermen, all these pieces of the system. And yet they keep coming back, the federal government anyway, and saying, no, it's sort of cut and dry, it's black and white, here's our. So you've mentioned many times you've tried very hard to get them to see your points of view, and it's led to even times when you had to sue, unfortunately. So is there any, what I'm curious about, is there any sort of association in addition to yours or facilitation of dialogue between the federal government or people that may be seeing the world through a very black and white, mechanical, analytical mindset, hyper-focused on models and data, and not really looking at the bigger picture? How can that dialogue be facilitated better to try to help them really understand first before you can then carry on and make these points that you're very valid?
I'll give you my very biased opinion. I think we too are looking at the numbers because the management program requires that. If we don't meet the numerical triggers, our fishery closes down. I think what the issue has been is that the federal government is misusing the science. They are arbitrarily making assumptions, and an example of that would be for the fishery side, the model says we need to reduce risk by 90%, and we are mandated to do that. We are working with all stakeholders to do that. On the vessel strike side, they have a proposed rule out now. They're the second human cause of right whale deaths. They haven't implemented any management changes since 2009. We did a round in 2014 and another one in 2022. The proposed risk reduction for vessel strikes is 27.5%. If you ran their risk through the same model as they ran ours, their target should be 75%. And so I immediately asked the federal government why there was a disconnect, why the commercial fishing industry was set to a different standard. I did that in August, and I was ignored. I followed up in September, and I was ignored. I followed up again in September, and I was ignored. And this might be coincidence, or maybe I'm just getting paranoid, but 1 hour after my association submitted our comments online through the federal rulemaking portal, I got a response to my question, which was inadequate. So the federal government is literally using the science differently when they're regulating fisheries and vessel strikes. It is in black and white, it is in their technical reports, and they have provided zero rationale for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it,
We're getting short on time.
Yeah, thank you.
We got one more question. Tommy's flagging me. We're going to keep this one quick.
Thanks, and
Please.
I know we're short on time. My name is Susan Duncan. Have come to Maine for my entire life, and only 2.5 years ago, though, moved here full time. We spent 11 years in DC, and 40 years of my career has been spent working with lawyers. Most people say, how in the world could you do that? Most of these are lawyers that have strong DC practices and interact with regulatory agencies all the time. And I guess my question really is, you know, we talk about the federal government and it's the big behemoth, and the Endangered Species Act sounds like it needs some amendment in any event, but what can we do from up here in Maine? Are we using the political, I know it's not political, but having been in DC and worked with people on strategy, it's pretty clear that political pressure can make a difference. Sometimes it's optics, sometimes it's constituents. Maine is just one state, but I just wonder if we can do more. I know you're doing so much, but I think more importantly, and I'd ask Kurt this too, if he's made 5 trips across the country trying to educate, trying to change opinion, just get that public awareness out there, what more could some of us do to help with this? It's so frustrating. Here we are up in Maine, and a lot of this is going on in California or DC, and I just wonder what else you think that those of us who either have connections or experience, or just, you know, helping here in Maine to raise funds or awareness or get that collaborative facilitation going, what your thoughts on that are, because you're right there in the weeds, but there are many of us that really want to help and are very frustrated that aren't lobster fishermen or women, but really want to help. So I guess that would be a question.
And that's a perfect question to close on. It was also my last question, which was, what can we do?
Yeah, I will say we do have a congressional strategy in play as well. We're looking at potential strategic amendments to the laws. It's very difficult to do, but it is the statutes themselves that are driving some of these things. They're very difficult, and a lot of it is also the agency interpretation. But I would encourage everybody to go to savemainelobstermen.org. There's a lot of information there. There are ways to donate there. Certainly financial resources are significant because we have a few legal teams now, people who take the regular court cases through the district courts, and then different people who do the appeals. It's very cash intensive. We have a huge need to, you know, get some high-level scientists to really dig in and challenge the science, get things published in the literature so that the federal government will be forced to consider them. And I know Marianne has a wealth of resources as well that she can tell you about that would really help educate people and tell people to eat Maine lobster. It's sustainable.
Right. Yeah, I think eating Maine lobster is really important. And also, if you're looking for more information on the subject, we have a website called rightwhalesandmainelobster.com, and a lot of the data that Patrice and Kurt have been talking about, you'll find there. You know, fact sheets, some of the videos, things like that. So it's a great resource.
Spread the word, support the cause. Models are complicated things, and they're being used against us. They're super complicated. Models are complicated. Just ask Tom Brady. Too soon?
We're getting
Too soon?
Kurt back.
Too soon? Too
I'm
soon?
sure you wouldn't regret zooming him in.
But if you know any modelers, help them help our cause, because we need more eyes on the model, and that will help us a lot. But thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Very, very much appreciated.
Yeah. Patrice, Marianne, Kurt, thank you so much. You can see why we made sure Kurt was here in whatever way he can be, with or without underwear. So he'll be here in the future just to do stand-up, apparently. So thanks, everyone. This is what a discussion, what an issue. Holy geez, good luck. We're all pulling for you. We all need to be, I mean, we're going to leave here better educated and do what we can. Eat lobster, tell your friends, tell your local politicians, tell everyone. I mean, I think we've got to really get engaged as a whole community to support lobstering in Maine. To stay appraised of future updates at the Chamber, we encourage everyone to sign up for the Chamber's Advocacy and Events newsletter by scanning the QR codes that can be found on the signs at your tables. And as we conclude today's program, you can view a complete list of all the Chamber's upcoming events at the Chamber's website, portlandregion.com. I hope to see you all at our next Eggs and Issues on December 15th, where we're going to learn about what challenges to the ski industry. This is actually serious. Challenges to the ski industry in Maine. There have been no whales spotted in the mountains of Maine, and the models are really creating challenges. Our panel presentation will feature leaders from Saddleback and Sugarloaf, and will be moderated by Dirk Gowans of Ski Maine. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.